Welcome. And in this session we're going to take a look at using Java with a database embedded as part of the application. Now, you may wish to do this if you wish to write an application and store data in a database that can exist between sessions. So each time you run your code, run your application, the data can be extracted from the database and reused wherever you got up to. In order to do that, you obviously would need your application and your database. And rather than expect the user of your application to separately install a database, you can package up a database as part of your application. And this is what we mean by saying we're going to embed a database as part of our application. So this scenario is all about writing an application that makes use of a database and sets it all up and installs it and populates it with any data that it needs as part of the install. So let's take a look at how we might go about this. First off, what are we setting out to achieve? Well, we want to create an application which, when it starts, checks to see if we already have a database and a table within that database that we wish to use. If there's no database, then we should create it. And if there's no table, if there's a database but no table, then we should create the table. And in our particular example, we're going to pre-populate that with 2 rows of data. And we also want to be able to then have our application have an ability to write out all of the information that is in that table that we've created so that we can see it's in there. When our application runs, if the database and the table both exist, then the application will, rather than create it and pre-populate it with data, it will simply output each row of data that's within our table. And our database is going to contain a single table, which we're going to call users for the sake of argument, and we'll give it 3 columns. The first column will be just an ID that's the primary key. The second column will hold the first name of a user, and the third column will hold the last name of the user. So that's what we're setting out to do. In order to do that, what is it we'll need to do? Well, as with our previous examples, we're going to use the Eclipse IDE with Java Standard Edition. I'm going to use version 1.7. You can use earlier versions or indeed later versions, certainly back to about 1.4. I think you should be okay. The other thing we're going to need is we're going to need a Java database connection library for the database we're going to use. Now, the database that I've decided to use is going to be SQLite. It's a well-known and popular database. It's used in lots of small applications like mobile phone applications and that, and is perfect for demonstrating this particular thing. To download the JDBC driver, simply open up a web browser, type in there SQLite, so that's SQLite, all one word, space JDBC, press enter, and you'll find one of the links near the top will be to a site hosted by bitbucket.org. And you simply go to the download section there, and the version I'm choosing to use is 3.8.11.2 or 11.1, depending on which one I pick up, but either one of those would be fine. So, having downloaded that, let's switch to Eclipse and make a start. I will start off by creating a new Java project. And I'm just going to call this SQLite demo for want of anything else. Keep everything else the default standards, so just press the finish button. So that creates my project folder. Now the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to go to projects and pick properties and make sure we're on the build path and that the libraries tab has been selected, because what we need to do is we need to add that JDBC jar file we downloaded earlier into our project so that we have those classes available. So I'm going to click on add external jars, go to where I've downloaded my jar file and press open and then OK, and that's put that in place. Right, the next thing we're going to do is we'll just navigate to where our source folder is, and we're going to create a new class. And I'm going to put this class in a package, softwarepulse.app, and I'm going to call my class, or SQLite test, I think, and I'll just accept all the other defaults, and that will create my stub. And then the first thing we're going to do in this class is we're going to create two private properties, both of which are going to be static. One is a connector to our database, and the other is going to be a Boolean value, has data, and we're going to initialize that to false. Okay, so I just need to import the Java SQL connect connection either. I've misspelled it. There we are. So it's a connection, not a connect, or whatever I'd typed. So our connection is going to handle a connection to our database, and our has data Boolean value is going to be used so that when the application starts up, it will need to establish a connection to the database and check that the table exists, as we discussed earlier. Once it's done that check, it will set that Boolean value to true, which means any other method that we call from this class won't have to bother to go away and check, because it knows it has already done it. So that's what we're going to use it for. Now, we're going to have two public methods. One is going to be display users, and the other is going to be add users. And then we're going to have two private methods. One is going to be get connection, and the other is going to be initialize. Get connection is obviously going to set up our connection to our database, and initialize is going to be the bit that will pre-create the table and pre-populate it with values if we haven't already got a table in place. So let's start with display users. So we're going to have a public view that is public method that's going to return a result set, so a Java SQL result set, and we're going to call it display users. It's going to be passed no parameters, and I'll just import the Java SQL result set there. So we're first going to do is check to see whether we have a connection, or we're going to check to see whether our connection is null, in fact. And if our connection is null, then we're going to call the get connection private method for this class that we're going to create in a minute. Once we have created our connection, then we are going to create an SQL statement, which we're going to call state, and we're going to create it connected to our database that we've got. So I'll just do a create statement, and we're going to use the query, SQL query, select F name, which is going to be the second column containing our first name, and L name, which will be the third column, from user, which is going to be our database table. So it's a nice simple query. There's 3 columns, but we're only going to return 2, the first name and the last name, because we're not interested in the ID. Now what we need to do is import that statement from the SQL. Oops. And then we're going to set our result set equal to the output of executing our SQL query. Yes, excuse me, I've got a little carried away with myself. I create a statement there and actually put the query in the execute query. That makes much more sense. So we'll get whatever result comes back, and then what we're going to do is, because we simply return our results to the invoker as a result set and let them handle it, that's all we need to do to display users. So what we really need to do now is go and sort out our get connection. So create our get connection method stub there. We are going to have to come back to our method display users and make a few tweaks to it in a minute, but let's get this in place and then you'll see where we need to come back to. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up, we need to load our JDBC driver into our driver manager. So we do that by calling this class for name and then passing it the name of the JDBC driver that we want to make available. Org SQLite.jdbc. Yeah, okay, good. I'll come back to that error in a minute. And then we're going to set our connection to our driver manager, get connection, and then we're going to pass it the URL. Oops. So it's a JDBC connection, SQLite, test1.db. Okay, so the last part, this SQLite test1.db, is actually going to be the name of our database file. So you can actually call that last bit whatever you want. Okay, and then finally, I'm going to call a method called Initialize, which is the other internal method that we haven't yet done. Okay. Oops. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to create that initialize method. And just while I'm here, there are some errors here. So this class for name, right, there is the possibility that it may not be able to find this class, in which case it will throw an error, and we either have to catch that error or we have to throw that error back to whichever method invoked it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to throw the error back. So I'm going to say throw it back, and I'm going to throw a class not found exception back, because that's the error we would get from that line there. Now the next line, again, there's a possibility of being able to throw an error. And again, I'm going to throw this one back, and this one is going to be an SQL exception. Okay. Now, if we go back to our display users method here, right, what we've said is we're going to call this get connection, and because it can throw both those errors back, we either need to surround them with a try and catch and handle the error, or we in turn need to throw an error. I'm going to throw an error again, so I'm going to throw both the class not found and the SQL exception error back to whoever uses this class. So that is what we're going to do. So we were going to do this private initialize method, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see whether has data is true, because if has data is true, then we don't need to bother. So actually we're saying if has data is not true, then we obviously need to do the check. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to then set has data to true, so that we don't subsequently go and check it again. And then we're going to create a statement. We'll use state again. We'll do a connection to the database. So we're going to create our statement and make that capital. And then we're going to have a result set. My typing is amiss, which I'll call res again. And here what we're going to do is we're going to do a select name from SQLite master where type equals table, oops, and name equals user. Okay, so SQLite master is the master table in any SQLite database, and it keeps a record of all the other tables in there. So what we're looking for is something of type table with the name user, and that will tell us whether there already exists a table of the name user in the database. If there is, we're going to assume it's the one we want to use. The couple of errors we've got here are the fact that obviously we've got the same problem of doing a connection, so we're going to throw an SQL exception, because both the state and both the connection create statement and the state execute query can throw an SQL query. So that's what we're going to throw there. So once we've executed the query, we'll get the results back in the results set, and then we want to check to see whether we got anything. So what we're saying is, if we didn't get anything, if the result set doesn't have a next, which in this case would be the first one, then we don't have anything. So what I'm interested, just to prove to myself that this piece of code is running, is I'm just going to do a an output to the standard output, and just say, oh, what, building the user table or something like that, with, yeah, because we're going to with pre-populated values. So we'll just put that out to standard out, which means every time this bit of code is running, every time we're going to write stuff into the table, we'll be able to see that happening. So next we need to what we're going to do, need to build the table. So actually I don't want all of that, because that's what I wanted. So we're going to create another statement variable. We're going to use our same connection object to create our statement. and we'll do an execute, and we'll put in our query that we want to execute here. So we're saying the table doesn't exist. What we need to do is do a create table command. Our table is going to be called user, I think. Then we said we were going to have an ID column as the first one, so I'll make that an integer. First column we're going to call fname, which is going to be short for first name. And I'm not going to worry too much about the types here because we're just trying to demonstrate how this works. So we'll do a varchar. I'll do that just in case this needs to go on another line in case it doesn't fit. So we'll do last name. I'll make that a varchar as well, and we'll do exactly the same. I'm just randomly picking 60. Right, and let's do another line there. And then what we're going to do is I said we were going to have a primary key, which was going to be ID. So we'll say primary key is our ID value. And then we'll close our parentheses and we terminate with a semicolon, and then we'll semicolon on the whole statement. So there we are. There's our SQL just to create a simple table to get us going. Right, the next thing we want to do is insert some data. Now remember we said we were going to put in 2 rows of data just to give us a starting point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a prepared statement. I'm going to try and spell it correctly as well. So I'll just call that prep. I'm going to create a connection to our database and do a prepared statement. And now we're going to do an insert. What am I going to do? I'm going to insert into, obviously, user, which is our table, and values, and let me just close that. Values. Okay, so our table has 3 columns, so what we're going to do is we're going to go for our 3 variables there. We'll terminate that with a semicolon, and then we'll terminate our Java line with a semicolon. And we're going to import the prepared statement from Java SQL, because that's what we need to do. So we've got 3 variables in our insert. So what we need to do now is do a set string, and into column 2 we want to put the first name. So and then into column 3 we want to put the last name. We're not going to worry about column 1 because column 1 is a primary key. It will just be incremented as you insert a row into the table. It will get a value, so we don't need to worry about that. And we're going to execute our prepared statement, and that will put that first row in for us. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to second prepared statement, and we'll put in Paul Smith as our second row and execute that. Oops. So there we are, there's our initialize method. So we've got our two private methods, which is get connection and initialize. Now there was one other public method I talked about that we would do. We're not going to use it, but I'm going to put it in now, and maybe in another session we will look to make use of it. And that is add user. The ability to be able to add something to the table. So we're going to pass two parameters in our call, our method call. We're obviously going to pass the first name and the last name. And what we'll do is we'll do our standard check to see whether we have a connection. If we don't, we'll call our get connection. That will mean that our method now needs to throw our two methods of class not found and SQL exception. And then what we'll do is we'll do a prepared statement. And obviously this is going to be an insert into our user table, values, and very much like we just did. But the difference here is we, in this case, will set that to be the first name parameter we just passed. And that will be column 3, and in there we're going to put last name. And yeah, that's where I got confused. The last name I kept the N capital, the first time I didn't. So, execute we need to do, don't we? Oh, and that's set short instead of set string. Ooh, and that's far too many T's. There we are. So, there's our add user. If we want to add a user, we can call that and add in a user. So, really, the main way you would use this is by calling our two public methods, which is either add user or display users. And everything else would be taken care of for us. If there's no table, it would be created. If there's no database, that would be created, and then the table would be created, and we'd end up with some users. So, we now need to turn our attention to using this class we've created. I'll just save it. So we're going to create a new Java class, put it in the same software app package. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call this one, I'm just going to call it app. I want a public static void main method, because we're going to use this to run our application, and then we'll just accept all the rest of the defaults, and we get our stub here. So I'm going to create two properties. The first one is obviously going to be the class we've just created. Yes. And then we're going to create a result set, because if you remember, when we call display users, it returns a sort of SQL result set. So we'll have our result set here. Oops. In our main method, and then we're going to have to I'll talk about it in a second. So what we're going to do is we'll assign our result set to the result of test.display users there, and then what we'll do is we'll do a while while our result set has some items to go through. We will simply do a system out print line, so we'll output to the standard out, and we'll do rs get string, and the string we want to get is first name, put a space in, and then we'll do rs get string last name. Okay, so got some errors here. So if we check this, if you remember in our SQLite test class, we were throwing a lot of errors and saying, oh, we're going to throw it, we're going to throw this error, throw that error. Well, all of these errors are now being thrown back to us because we're using this class, this SQLite test class that throws all these errors. They're throwing them all back to us, and we need to do something with it. So we are actually going to surround them with try and catch. Ooh, I didn't expect it to do. I didn't intend for it to do that. But do you know what? We will stick with that. I'll take this while loop. The while's going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm actually going to put the method call to display users and the iteration through the result set all in the same try catch. I'm not actually going to do anything apart from print a stack trace at this point in time. Obviously, if you were going to build an application on top of this, all of these things you'd want to take care of. So what we've actually got now is an application that will call test display users, and if there's no database created, it will create a database, it will create a table, it will populate it with default values. We'll see that output into the standard console where it says here, building the user table with pre-populated values. That will be called the first time we run this application. Subsequent times we run this application, we won't get to see this value. Now, the other thing is, if we take a look at, I'm using Eclipse, so it uses the concept of a workspace, and if I go to my workspace, I can see my SQLite demo project folder there. And if I go in there and I look in the root of it, you'll see there's just a .class path and a .project. When I run this, there'll be another file entered in here, which will be this SQLite test DB file, and that will be my database. So let's switch to my application, press the run, and you can see down in the console we've got this building the user table with pre-populated values, and then it actually displays what's in the table, John McNeil and Paul Smith. And if we go over to our project folder, you'll see we've now got this SQLite test1 database file. if I now clear all the console and I run this application again, you'll see this time I only get John McNeil and Paul Smith because the database was already present and my SQLite test 1 database is still there. So there we go. That's how you can embed a database into your application and have it create and set up the first time your application runs. So I hope you've enjoyed this exercise and it's given you some ideas for your own coding. Now all you have to do is go forward and have fun coding.